The desert's hidden gift, the wanderer's path. Jenna Vale had learned 3 truths about survival on the outer rim worlds. First, never promise what you cannot deliver. Second, always leave a job cleaner than you found it. Third, trust your hands before you trust your heart, because hearts lie but broken things always tell the truth. She walked the crystal dunes of Ashara with nothing but a tool belt, a water flask, and a reputation for fixing what others called unsalvageable. The sand here shimmered like crushed diamonds under the twin suns, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. Her boots left shallow prints that the wind erased within moments, as if the desert itself preferred to forget visitors. The settlement she had just left paid her in food and fuel, grateful she had coaxed their dying water purifier back to life. They offered her a bed, but beds meant staying, and staying meant roots, and roots were anchors for people who believed tomorrow looked like today. Jenna kept moving because movement was honest work, and honest work never asked questions about the scars on her wrists or why she flinched at loud voices. She was thinking about the next settlement, calculating water rations and distance when the sky split open with a sound like the universe tearing fabric. Fire from heaven. The object fell like a comet wrapped in lightning, carving a brilliant scar across the morning sky. Jenna's instincts screamed to take cover, but her curiosity had always been louder than her fear. She ran toward the impact site, her tool belt jangling a rhythm of metal against metal. The crater was still smoking when she reached it, heat waves dancing across the sand like liquid glass. At its center lay something that made her breath catch and her rational mind stumble. It was massive, easily the size of a small transport shuttle, covered in scales that gleamed like polished obsidian shot through with veins of silver. Wings, tattered and scorched, sprawled across the sand like broken sails. A dragon. Jenna had seen them on news feeds, terrifying symbols of imperial might that enforced the Celestial Empire's will across 1,000 worlds. But those images showed predators, weapons with wings and fire. This creature was something else entirely. This was suffering made flesh. Chains wrapped around its body, each link etched with glowing symbols that pulsed with sickly light. The collar around its throat looked like it had been grown into the scales, a fusion of metal and bone that made Jenna's stomach turn. Burns covered the dragon's hide in patterns too precise to be accidental. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically, with the kind of cruelty that came from seeing a living thing as nothing more than property. The first touch. The dragon's eyes opened as Jenna approached, molten gold irises that held intelligence and pain in equal measure. She expected fire, expected violence, expected the death that every human child learned to associate with these creatures. Instead, the dragon simply watched her with something that looked terrifyingly close to hope. "Easy there," Jenna whispered, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I know you probably understand every word I am saying, so let me be clear. I am not here to hurt you. I am just a mechanic who cannot walk away from something broken." She knelt beside the dragon's massive head, close enough to feel the heat radiating from its body. The chains had cut deep into the flesh, leaving wounds that wept a strange luminescent fluid. Jenna recognized the runes on the chains as control glyphs, technology mixed with ancient magic, designed to cause pain if the wearer disobeyed. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling tools from her belt. She could not break the chains, not without the proper equipment, but she could treat the wounds. She dampened a cloth with her precious water and began cleaning the burns, working with gentle precision around the embedded metal. The dragon trembled at her touch, a vibration she felt in her bones, but it did not pull away. Instead, it seemed to lean into her ministrations, accepting her help with a vulnerability that broke something in Jenna's carefully guarded heart. "Somebody did this to you," she said softly, anger coloring her words. "Somebody treated you like a machine instead of a living being. That is not fixing. That is just cruelty wearing a uniform." She worked for hours as the suns climbed and fell, fashioning a shade from her emergency tarp to shield them both from the killing heat. She talked while she worked, filling the silence with stories about stubborn engines and impossible repairs, about the satisfaction of making something work again that everyone else had given up on. The arrival. The military skiffs appeared on the horizon just as the first sun began to set, their polished hulls catching the light like knives. 6 vessels in perfect formation, bearing the golden crest of the Celestial Empire on their prows. They descended with the kind of precision that spoke of countless battles and absolute authority. Jenna stood, placing herself between the dragon and the approaching ships. Her heart raced, but her hands remained steady. She had faced angry clients, corrupt officials, and desperate people with weapons before. This was just another problem that needed solving, even if the stakes had never been quite this high. The lead skiff landed, and a woman emerged wearing a uniform that cost more than Jenna had earned in 5 years. Her face carried the expression of someone who had never been told no and would not start today. "Step away from Imperial property," the officer commanded, her voice amplified across the crater. "You are interfering with a military recovery operation." Jenna did not move. Behind her, she felt the dragon shift, gathering what strength remained in its battered body. "He is hurt," Jenna said clearly, "and I am not done fixing him." The officer's hand moved toward her weapon. Soldiers raised rifles, targeting systems humming to life. The desert held its breath, waiting to see which way violence would fall. Then the world changed. The choice. The dragon rose behind Jenna like dawn, breaking over mountains, wings spreading despite their damage, casting a shadow that swallowed the crater whole. But instead of attacking, instead of the fire and fury that every soldier expected, the dragon did something that stopped history in its tracks. It knelt, the massive head lowered until it touched the sand at Jenna's feet. The universal gesture of submission, of choosing, of claiming. The dragon's voice rolled across the desert, deep and resonant, speaking in a language Jenna did not understand, but every soldier did. The officer's weapon faltered, rifles lowered not from mercy but from shock, because by ancient law, by traditions older than the empire itself, a royal dragon who chooses a keeper creates a bond that even emperors cannot break without destroying the foundation of their own power. Jenna placed her hand on the dragon's brow, feeling the warmth of scales beneath her palm, completing a connection that would echo across galaxies. She looked at the officer with desert sand in her hair and oil under her nails, a nobody from nowhere who had just accidentally rewritten the rules. "My name is Jenna Vale," she said quietly, "and I think we need to talk about how you treat your dragons." The officer's face went pale. Behind her, a communications officer was already transmitting the scene to every corner of the empire, spreading the image of a human woman and a kneeling dragon prince faster than light itself. In prison cells, hope flickered. In palace halls, fear took root. And in the heart of the celestial empire, an emperor received news that would force him to confront the cost of his power. The dragon, whose name Jenna did not yet know, pressed his muzzle gently against her hand. A promise made without words, a partnership forged in pain and mercy. The beginning of something that would shake stars from their courses and teach galaxies a new way to measure strength. The desert wind rose, carrying their story to the horizon and beyond. The Palace of Silent Thrones, journey to the capital. The Imperial transport ship hummed with a tension that had nothing to do with its engines. Jenna sat in a cabin that was technically luxurious but felt more like a gilded cage, watching stars streak past the viewport. Corveth, as she had learned the dragon's name through the ship's nervous translator, rested beside her, his massive form barely fitting in the cargo hold they had converted into temporary quarters. She had spent the 3-day journey learning about him through gestures and broken translations. He was young by dragon standards, barely into his 2nd century, bred specifically to be a weapon for the Empire's endless expansion. The scars on his body told stories of training that looked more like torture, of a childhood spent learning to kill on command while wearing chains that burned if he hesitated. "They took me from my mother when I could barely fly," Corveth had managed to communicate through the translator, his voice a rumble that made the ship's hull vibrate. "She sang to me once. I still remember the melody, but not the words. They said emotions made us weak, made us unreliable weapons. So they burned the emotions out with pain and discipline." Jenna had listened with growing horror, understanding for the first time the true cost of the Empire's power. These were not just weapons or tools. They were children, stolen and broken and rebuilt into something their parents would not recognize. Now, as the capital world grew large in the viewport, she felt the weight of what she had accidentally started. A nobody mechanic from the outer rim, suddenly thrust into politics that could reshape civilizations. But she had never been good at walking away from broken things. And Corveth was far from the only dragon who needed fixing. The Emperor's city. The capital was called Celestia Prime, and it lived up to its arrogant name. Towers of crystallized starlight reached toward the heavens, connected by bridges that defied gravity and common sense. Ships of every size and purpose filled the air like schools of metallic fish, their movements choreographed by traffic systems that processed millions of calculations per second. At the heart of it all stood the Imperial Citadel, a mountain of architecture that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of midnight stone, and then decorated with enough gold to ransom solar systems. Banners bearing the Emperor's crest, a dragon wrapped around a star, fluttered from every tower and rampart. The transport docked at a private bay, and Jenna stepped out to find herself surrounded by an honor guard that looked more like a threat assessment team. Soldiers in ceremonial armor that hid very functional weapons watched Corveth with the kind of attention cats give to suddenly uncertain prey. A woman approached, tall and elegant in robes that shifted color like oil on water. Her face was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, sharp and cold and perfectly composed. Silver thread traced patterns across her clothing that marked her as someone important, someone who stood close to power and knew how to use it. "Miss Vale," the woman said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I am Lady Seraphine, Chief Advisor to Emperor Dravik. Welcome to Celestia Prime. His Imperial Majesty requests your presence in the throne room immediately." It was not a request, despite the polite phrasing. Jenna glanced at Corveth, who watched Lady Seraphine with barely concealed hostility, his scales rippling with colors that the translator marked as warning patterns. "Corveth comes with me," Jenna said firmly. "We stay together." Lady Seraphine's smile never reached her eyes. "Of course. The prince belongs at court after all, even if his choice of companion is unprecedented." The word unprecedented carried enough ice to freeze atmospheres. Jenna pretended not to notice, falling into step beside Corveth as they were led deeper into the citadel, the throne of stars. The throne room was designed to make visitors feel small, and it succeeded brilliantly. The ceiling soared impossibly high, covered in a projection of the night sky that showed every world the Empire controlled, each one marked with a glowing point of light. The floor was polished obsidian that reflected everything like dark water, creating the illusion of walking on the void between stars. At the far end, elevated on a dais that required climbing exactly 100 steps, sat Emperor Dravik on a throne that looked like it had been forged from the heart of a dead star. He was older than Jenna expected, perhaps 200 years by the silver in his hair, but age had not softened him. He wore his authority like armor, every line of his body speaking to power that had never been successfully challenged. Courtiers lined the walls like exotic birds, their expensive clothing a rainbow of wealth and influence. They whispered behind raised hands, their eyes tracking Jenna with expressions ranging from curiosity to naked contempt. A human, here, claiming rights over a dragon prince. The scandal of it vibrated through the room like a plucked string. Corveth stopped at the base of the stairs and lowered himself in a bow that showed respect without submission. Jenna stood beside him, refusing to kneel because she had not done anything wrong and would not pretend otherwise. Emperor Dravik studied them for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the vast space without shouting, amplified by technology hidden in the architecture. "Jenna Vale of the Outer Rim, you have caused quite the commotion in my empire." "I fixed something broken, Your Majesty," Jenna replied, keeping her voice steady. "I did not know fixing things was controversial." A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the court. Lady Seraphine's expression tightened with disapproval, but Emperor Dravik's mouth twitched, almost a smile, there and gone so quickly Jenna might have imagined it. "My son chose you," the Emperor said, making it a statement rather than a question. "By ancient law, that bond cannot be severed without his consent. But law and wisdom are not always companions. Tell me, mechanic, what do you know about dragons?" "I know they feel pain," Jenna said quietly. "I know they bleed and suffer and remember kindness. I know that treating them like machines instead of people is bad engineering wrapped in cruelty. And I know that Corveth deserves better than what he got." The throne room fell silent. Courtiers stopped whispering. Guards stopped shifting. Even the projected stars seemed to hold still, waiting to see how an emperor responds to truth spoken plainly. Emperor Dravik descended the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. He moved like a man who had fought his way to power and held it through force of will and strategic brilliance. When he reached the bottom, he stopped directly in front of Jenna. close enough that she could see the weight of centuries in his eyes. "My empire was built on dragon fire," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "We breed them, train them, deploy them as living weapons because that is what keeps 1,000 worlds unified under one banner. What you call cruelty, I call necessity. What you call suffering, I call the price of peace." "Then your peace is bought with blood," Jenna said, not backing down despite her racing heart. "And blood debts always come due eventually." The Test Emperor Dravik studied her for another long moment, then turned to address the assembled court. "There will be a trial," he announced, his voice filling the throne room with the weight of imperial decree. "Under the old laws, a bond claimed between dragon and keeper must be tested before the court. 3 challenges, 3 proofs that the bond is genuine and beneficial to the Empire. If Jenna Vale succeeds, her claim stands and Corveth remains under her protection. If she fails, the bond is void and the prince returns to imperial service." Jenna's stomach dropped. "What kind of challenges?" Lady Seraphine stepped forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "That will be determined by the Council of Lords, as tradition dictates. You have 3 days to prepare, Miss Vale. I suggest you use them wisely." The court erupted in excited chatter, nobles already placing bets and forming alliances around the coming spectacle. Jenna felt Corveth's presence behind her, solid and warm, a reminder that she was not alone in this. As they were escorted from the throne room, Corveth managed to lean close enough to whisper through the translator. "My brother will try to kill you before the trials begin. Prince Talron sees my freedom as a threat to his position. Be careful, Jenna Vale. This palace has more teeth than smiles." Jenna nodded, her mind already working through problems and solutions, calculations and risks. She was a mechanic, used to fixing things with her hands. But politics was a different kind of machine, one that ran on blood and ambition instead of fuel and electricity. That night, in quarters that were comfortable but clearly monitored, Jenna stood at a window overlooking the glittering capital and made herself a promise. She would not let them break Corveth again. She would not let this empire continue treating dragons like expendable tools, and if that meant playing their games and beating them at their own rules, then she would learn to be political as quickly as she had learned to repair quantum drives. Behind her, Corveth slept fitfully, his dreams troubled by memories of chains and fire. Jenna watched him and felt something fierce and protective bloom in her chest. They had called her a nobody from nowhere, a mechanic with grease under her nails and no right to stand in palaces. But nobodies changed history all the time. They just had to be stubborn enough to keep fixing things until the world made sense again. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, the bond that rewrote history. The first challenge, the arena had been built for spectacle. A massive oval amphitheater that could hold 50,000 spectators and broadcast to billions more across the empire. Jenna stood at its center, dwarfed by the architecture and the weight of watching eyes, feeling more exposed than she had ever felt in her life. The past 3 days had been a blur of preparation and politics. Courtiers had visited her quarters with offers of alliance that were really demands for loyalty. Servants had brought gifts that were clearly meant to establish debt. And through it all, Corveth had stayed close, teaching her what he could about dragon culture and imperial law through the inadequate translator. Now, as the first challenge began, Jenna faced something she had not anticipated. Not a physical test or a demonstration of skill, but a trial by fire in the most literal sense. Prince Talron entered the arena from the opposite side, and Jenna understood immediately why Corveth had warned her. Talron was everything his younger brother was not. Larger, older, scarred from dozens of battles, his scales a deep crimson that spoke of fire bred and refined across generations. He wore his power like a second skin, confident and cruel and absolutely certain of his superiority. "The first challenge," Lady Seraphine's voice echoed across the arena, "is dominance. A keeper must prove they can withstand a dragon's full might. Prince Talron will test the bond's strength. If Corveth interferes, the bond is void. If Jenna Vale breaks, the bond is void. She must face this alone." Jenna's heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Corveth's entire body had gone rigid with fury and fear. "This is murder dressed as tradition," he snarled, his voice carrying to the stands despite the translator's mechanical reproduction. "Talron will kill her." "Then your bond was weak," Talron called out, his voice smooth and mocking. A true keeper would have nothing to fear from a dragon's nature. Unless, of course, the little human cannot handle what she claimed to want. Jenna looked at Corveth, saw the terror in his golden eyes, and made her decision. She stepped forward, away from his protection, and faced Prince Talron with her chin up and her hands open. "I am ready," she said, though her voice shook slightly. Fire and trust. Talron's attack was not subtle. He did not build up gradually or give her time to prepare. He simply opened his jaws and released a torrent of dragon fire that turned the air itself into plasma. Jenna had 1 second to react. 1 heartbeat to remember everything Corveth had taught her in desperate, hurried lessons about dragon fire and thermal dynamics. She dropped to the ground and rolled hard to the left, feeling the heat sear past her, so close that her jacket started smoking. The crowd roared, a sound like a living thing hungry for violence. Talron turned, tracking her movement, preparing another blast. Jenna scrambled behind one of the arena's decorative pillars, buying herself seconds to think. Dragon fire was not just flame. It was superheated plasma controlled by biological processes she barely understood. But she was a mechanic, and everything had patterns, everything had weaknesses. She watched Talron's chest expand as he drew breath, saw the glow build in his throat, timed the delay between inhalation and release. 3 seconds. She had 3 seconds between each blast. When he fired again, she was already moving, using the pillar as cover and then sprinting for the next one. The fire hit stone and turned it molten, droplets of liquefied rock splashing across the arena floor. "Run, little human!" Talron laughed, clearly enjoying the hunt. "Show the Empire how brave you are when you cannot hide behind my brother's misplaced loyalty." Jenna's mind raced, calculating angles and distances. She could not keep dodging forever. Eventually, exhaustion or luck would fail her. She needed to change the equation, to transform this from a test of survival into something else entirely. She stopped running. Standing in the open, Jenna faced Prince Talron directly and did something that made the arena fall silent. She walked toward him, steady and deliberate, her hands still open and empty at her sides. "I am not afraid of you," she called out, and it was only half a lie. "Because I understand what you are really testing. Not whether I can survive your brother's fire, but whether I trust him enough to believe I do not need to." Talron's eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across his massive face. Behind him, in the stands reserved for the royal family, Emperor Dravik leaned forward slightly. Jenna stopped 20 paces from Talron and closed her eyes. "Corveth taught me about dragon fire," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet arena. "How it responds to the dragon's will, how it can be shaped and controlled. He told me that a bonded dragon's fire will never harm their chosen keeper, even if released by another dragon, because the bond creates a resonance that fire recognizes." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Talron. "So go ahead, Prince. Prove me wrong, or prove that the bond you are testing is stronger than your jealousy." Talron's roar shook the arena foundations. He reared back, chest expanding with enough breath to reduce her to ash, and released a column of fire that should have ended everything. The flames parted around Jenna like water around stone. She felt the heat, felt the air pressure change, felt every molecule of her being scream at her to run. But the fire bent away from her body, creating a perfect sphere of cool air with her at its center. The bond she shared with Corveth, invisible but undeniable, had altered her very signature in ways that dragon fire recognized and respected. When the flames died, Jenna still stood untouched. Her clothes were singed and her face was flushed with heat, but she was alive and whole. The arena erupted in chaos, half the crowd cheering and half screaming in outrage at what they had just witnessed. The brothers raged. Talron's second attack was not fire but fury. He lunged forward with claws extended, abandoning all pretense of tradition in favor of simple murder. Jenna had time to see death approaching, time to realize she had pushed too far, time to regret nothing. Corveth hit his brother like a meteor strike. The two dragons collided in midair. A tangle of scales and teeth and ancient sibling rivalry turned volcanic. They crashed to the arena floor hard enough to crack stone. Corveth's smaller frame somehow matching Talron's strength through sheer desperate determination. "You will not touch her," Corveth roared, his voice raw with emotion that years of training had tried to burn away. "I choose her. I claim her. And if you want to kill her, you go through me first." The Emperor stood, his movement stopping the chaos like a conductor silencing an orchestra. Guards poured into the arena, separating the brothers with electric prods and containment fields. Lady Seraphine looked like she wanted to protest, but one glance from Emperor Dravik silenced her. "Enough," the Emperor said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The first challenge is complete. Jenna Vale has proven her courage and her bond. Corveth has proven his loyalty supersedes all other commands. The trial continues tomorrow. As guards escorted everyone from the arena, Jenna caught Emperor Dravik's eye. He nodded once, a gesture so small no one else noticed, but it carried meaning she was only beginning to understand. The Emperor was testing something larger than just her bond with Corveth. He was testing whether his empire's foundations could withstand the truth. The second challenge. The second challenge came at midnight in the palace gardens, which should have been Jenna's first warning. No audiences, no grand arena, just moonlight and shadows and Lady Seraphine waiting with a smile that promised suffering. The challenge of sacrifice, the advisor announced, her voice silk over steel. A keeper must prove they value their dragon above themselves. You have two choices, Miss Vale. Either you submit to 3 days of what we call adjustment therapy, the same process we use to train young dragons, or Corveth returns to the conditioning chambers for recalibration. Jenna's blood went cold. She had seen the scars that conditioning left, had heard Corveth's nightmares about the chambers where they broke dragons' spirits into manageable pieces. Adjustment therapy? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be terrible. Pain conditioning, sensory deprivation, and behavioral modification, Lady Seraphine said pleasantly. Nothing permanent, of course. We are quite skilled at causing maximum discomfort without lasting damage. 3 days and the second challenge is complete. Or Corveth spends a week in reconditioning and we see if your precious bond survives imperial methods. Beside Jenna, Corveth made a sound like grinding stone. No, Jenna, no. You cannot let them do this. I have survived the chambers before. I will survive again. But Jenna was already doing the math, already seeing the trap within the trap. If she refused, Corveth suffered and their bond looked weak. If she agreed, she proved the bond meant something worth suffering for. Either way, the Empire won something, unless she changed the rules again. I have a third option, Jenna said quietly. We both take the therapy, together. Same room, same duration, same pain. That way neither of us suffers alone, and you get your proof that the bond works both ways. Lady Seraphine's mask slipped, showing genuine surprise. That is not how this challenge works. Then change how it works, Jenna said, meeting the advisor's gaze without flinching. Because if your goal is to break us, you will fail either way. And if your goal is to test whether this bond is real, then test it properly. We are stronger together than separate. Prove me wrong. The advisor looked to the shadows where Emperor Dravik had been listening, invisible but present. A moment stretched into eternity, and then the Emperor's voice emerged from darkness. Agreed. 3 days. Together. Prepare yourselves. Pain shared. The therapy chambers were clinically white and precisely cruel, designed by people who understood nervous systems and how to make them scream. Jenna and Corveth were separated by a transparent wall, able to see each other but not touch, a calculated addition to the psychological torture. The pain started small, electric shocks timed randomly to prevent anticipation, lights that strobed at frequencies designed to trigger nausea, sounds pitched to resonate with bone and caused deep, aching discomfort. Hours blended into each other, marked only by the changing torments. But Jenna discovered something the designers had not anticipated. Every time the pain peaked, every time her body wanted to quit, she looked through the transparent wall and saw Corveth looking back. His golden eyes locked with hers, sharing the suffering, refusing to break as long as she refused to break. They developed a rhythm. When Jenna felt herself slipping toward unconsciousness, Corveth would tap his claw against the wall in patterns, binary code he had learned from watching her repair ships, spelling out messages. Stay strong. Almost through. We survive. When Corveth's body convulsed from neural disruptors, Jenna pressed her hand to the wall and sang. Lullabies her mother had taught her before the colony failed. Work songs from the docks where she first learned to fix things. Anything to give him something to focus on besides pain. On the 3rd day, when Lady Seraphine came to end the test, she found them both conscious, both defiant, staring at each other through the transparent wall like they were the only real things in a false universe. Impossible, the advisor breathed. No one stays aware through all 3 days. The protocol is designed to break consciousness by hour 40. Jenna's voice came out hoarse but steady. You designed it to break someone alone. We were never alone. The final test. The 3rd challenge was public again, but different from the first. Instead of combat, The arena had been converted into something that looked almost like a classroom. Scholars in formal robes occupied the stands where spectators had been, and the floor was covered in holographic displays showing dragon breeding records, genetic data, and training protocols. Emperor Dravik himself sat at the center of the scholars, his expression unreadable. "The final challenge," he announced, "is wisdom. Jenna Vale has claimed that our treatment of dragons is flawed. Very well, prove it. Present your case before the Empire's greatest minds and convince them that change is necessary. You have 1 hour." It was the cruelest challenge yet because it required her to be right, not brave, not determined, but actually factually correct about things she had only begun to understand. Jenna felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like gravity increasing. She looked at the data displayed around her. Information she had been requesting for days and been denied. Breeding statistics, training success rates, dragon lifespans under Imperial service compared to wild populations. The numbers told a story the Empire did not want to hear. "You breed dragons for loyalty and power," Jenna began, her voice gaining strength as she found her footing. "You select for aggression, for fire temperature, for size and strength. But look at these mortality rates. By age 200, 70% of Imperial dragons are dead or too damaged for service. Wild dragons live for 1,000 years. You are not creating weapons. You are creating expensive, short-lived tools that burn out from the stress you put them under." A scholar stood, his face skeptical. "The Empire requires dragons who can serve. Wild dragons are unpredictable, dangerous. Our methods ensure control." "Your methods ensure compliance through trauma," Jenna countered, pulling up medical records she had studied during sleepless nights. "Look at these psychological profiles. 95% of Imperial dragons show signs of severe depression. 60% develop self-destructive behaviors. You are creating weapons that want to die, and you call that success." She turned to another display showing genetic diversity trends. "And your breeding programs are collapsing. You have narrowed the gene pool so dramatically that each generation is weaker than the last. In another century, there might not be enough genetic diversity left to sustain the population. You are not building an empire. You are building an extinction event." The scholars muttered among themselves, but Jenna pressed forward, feeling Corveth's presence behind her like a second heartbeat. "But the real proof is standing right here," she said, gesturing to Corveth. "You tortured him for decades trying to make him the perfect weapon. You gave him every reason to hate all humans, to see us as nothing but slavers and monsters, and yet when given the choice, he chose mercy. He chose partnership. Not because I controlled him, but because I offered him what your empire never has, basic decency." She looked directly at Emperor Dravik. "You asked what I know about dragons. I know this. They are not tools. They are people. And if your empire is built on treating people like property, then your empire deserves to fall." The arena fell silent. Scholars exchanged looks. Guards shifted nervously. Emperor Dravik sat motionless on his throne, his face carved from stone. Then slowly the Emperor stood. "You are right." 3 words that cracked the foundations of civilization. "I have known for years," Emperor Dravik continued, his voice carrying weight that bent light. "I have seen the reports, read the projections, understood the cost. But empires do not change easily, and admitting fault looks like weakness to those who would tear us apart. So I continued, hoping time would offer solutions that courage could not." He descended from his seat, walking toward Jenna with steps that measured the distance between past and future. "You have given me something I needed," the Emperor said quietly. "Proof that another way is possible. A bond formed in freedom instead of chains. A partnership built on trust instead of terror, and witnesses to carry this story across my empire. Forcing change I have been too afraid to mandate." He looked at his son, at Corveth standing tall despite his scars, and something ancient and painful moved across the Emperor's face. "I failed you," he said to the Dragon Prince. "I let tradition and necessity justify cruelty. I told myself it was for the Empire, for peace, for the greater good. But Jenna Vale is correct. An empire built on suffering cannot last. It will collapse under the weight of its own moral bankruptcy." The new dawn. The reforms started slowly and then accelerated like a chain reaction. Dragon breeding programs were redesigned to prioritize health over aggression. Conditioning chambers were retrofitted into something resembling schools instead of torture facilities. Young dragons were given choices about service, and stunning numbers chose to serve anyway. Once service stopped looking like slavery. Corveth became an ambassador, traveling to worlds where imperial dragons were stationed and showing them that life could be different. Many stayed in service, finding purpose in protecting the empire that had hurt them. But now they served as partners, not property. Their consent and well-being valued as much as any human soldiers. Jenna remained at Corveth's side, no longer a mechanic fixing broken ships but a symbol fixing a broken system. She trained other humans in dragon care, teaching them to see these magnificent creatures as people worthy of respect. She testified before councils and advised governors and slowly, painfully, helped reshape an empire that had forgotten how to be gentle. There were setbacks. Prince Talron attempted a coup, gathering dragons who preferred the old ways, who had been broken so completely they feared freedom more than chains. The rebellion lasted 3 months before collapsing, not from military defeat but from dragons defecting to Corveth's side, once they understood the choice being offered. Emperor Dravik aged visibly during those difficult years, carrying the weight of trying to undo centuries of harm. He made Corveth his heir, passing over Talron, declaring that the Empire's future belonged to those who understood mercy as strength. 5 years after Jenna found a wounded dragon in the desert, she stood on a balcony overlooking Celestia Prime and watched the city glow with celebration. Today, the Empire had signed treaties with the free dragon clans, establishing relationships based on mutual respect instead of conquest. Corveth joined her, his scales catching the light, scars still visible but no longer defining him. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice no longer needing a translator. They had learned each other's languages over years of partnership. Walking toward that crater instead of away? Jenna smiled, resting her hand on his foreleg in a gesture that had become familiar and dear. "I am a mechanic," she said softly. "I fix broken things. You were not the only broken thing that needed fixing. You were just the first one brave enough to ask for help." "I did not ask," Corveth pointed out, amusement rumbling through his voice. "You just started repairing me without permission." "Best decisions I ever made," Jenna laughed. "Even if it did get complicated." They stood together as twin moons rose over the capital, a human and a dragon who had accidentally started a revolution by refusing to accept that cruelty was inevitable. Around them, an empire slowly learned to be better, guided by the simple principle that beings who can feel pain deserve to be treated with care. The galaxy was not fixed. There were still injustices, still cruelty, still systems that valued power over compassion. But change had begun, spreading like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, reaching farther than either of them could see. And in a desert on Ashara, where sand glittered like crushed diamonds, a memorial stood at the site of a crater that had changed history. A simple plaque with words in both human and dragon script. Here, mercy met suffering, and the galaxy learned a new way to be strong. Jenna and Corveth would return there sometimes, standing in the place where their story began, remembering the choice that had rewritten what was possible. The desert wind carried their story still, whispering to anyone brave enough to listen that broken things can be fixed, that empires can change, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to look away from suffering and choosing instead to help. Their bond, forged in pain and mercy, had become a bridge between species, and bridges, once built, carry traffic in both directions, connecting what was separate and making the impossible routine. The stars watched, ancient and patient, as humans and dragons learned to walk forward together, writing a future that neither could have imagined alone. And it all started with a mechanic who could not walk past something broken, and a dragon who remembered how to hope. The end.